Good afternoon. I'm Dan Tupper, President of the Board and District 3 Commissioner. This is the regular meeting of the Jefferson County PUD Board of Commissioners. It is Tuesday, August 17th, 2021. It is 5:02 p.m. At the discretion of the PUD Board of Commissioners and in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, Jefferson County PUD is no longer providing an in-person room for the meetings of the BOC. All meetings will be held remotely via Zoom. Participant audio will be muted upon entry. Please unmute at the appropriate time to speak. If you're calling in, use *6 to mute and unmute and *9 to raise your hands to speak. With that, I would ask for commissioner introductions to make sure we have a quorum for the audio.
Kenneth Collins, Commissioner, District 2.
Jeff Randall, Commissioner, District 1.
Thanks, commissioners. We have a quorum. Item 2 is the agenda review. Are there any additions or corrections? Kevin?
Yes, I have a correction. We're going to move 5.1 under Manager's Report to 7.4 under New Business. It's the 5-way agreement, and it kind of coincides with 7.4, which is the EDC. They all tie together, so I think it'll save us a little time.
Okay, we'll do that. We will move 5.1 to the 7.4 slot. Any other additions or go ahead, Kevin.
And I would like to add a calendar check, go over a few things on the calendar. I'm catching Annette off guard, but she will help me.
Should we do that under manager and staff reports?
Yes, please.
Okay, so let's make that 5.6 calendar. Any other additions or corrections? With that, I would entertain a motion to accept as amended.
I'll move we accept the agenda as amended.
And I will second.
Thank you, commissioners. Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous. We have an agenda. Item 3, public comment. The public comment period is for any items not specifically listed on the current agenda or for items that are listed on the consent agenda. The chair may place time limits on public comments to allow the meeting to be conducted in an efficient and orderly manner. We'll do 3 times per person or 3 minutes per person one time. And it would help for the audio recording if you could give your name and your service address, but it is not mandatory. Is there any public comment at this time? All right, other than the 1732 number I see, I think everybody else is staff or PUD related. So we will close public comment for now. If someone was unable to get through, we'll give them the ability to speak later on. With that, we will move on to item number 4, the consent agenda. All matters listed below on the consent agenda are considered under one motion and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on those items. If discussion is desired, that item will be removed from the consent agenda by a commissioner and will be considered separately. Is there any corrections or additions to the consent agenda?
Yes. The minutes of May 18th have a small but significant typo.
So is that something we need to remove, or can we just add it as an amendment to it? How do we want to proceed with that?
Well, specifically under paragraph 8.1, Dan, your name is spelled creatively there.
Okay, so will that change us being able to do the minute without Cammie, without having to pull them out and bring them back again?
That's fine. I'll just make that correction.
Okay, so we were going to amend the minutes for that was the regular meeting, Ken, on 5/18
Correct.
to show that my name was improperly spelled and be corrected. Any other additions or corrections?
I apologize, Mr. Tupper.
That's okay. I should have caught it. I probably read those 2 or 3 times. All right. With that, I would accept a motion to accept the consent agenda with the correction that was noted.
So moved.
I'll second the motion.
Been moved and seconded. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, we will move on to manager and staff reports. And that's 5.2 now, which is the PUD outside employment.
So the PUD has several employees that work at other positions for other companies that are somewhat related to the PUD. In this specific case, we have sought legal counsel. We have an employee whose wife owns a local ISP, and there's some question whether it's in competition with the PUD and others. So through legal counsel and others, it has been determined that this employee has reported to the PUD what his wife is doing. We are comfortable, at least today, there's not a conflict of interest. We will monitor this situation moving forward. And if there are additional items or a conflict does arise, we will bring it back to the board and discuss it at a future meeting. But it has been brought to staff's attention. It has been reviewed, and the PUD for today is saying the ISP can continue on the way it is. It becomes somewhat problematic with significant others and what they do in our employment, but at least for today, we're comfortable moving forward as it's going. But if things change, we'll bring additional information to the board. Any questions on that one?
Not from mine unless Joel wants to weigh in with anything. Commissioner Collins, did you raise your hand?
I did. Kevin, how many employees in total are working at outside jobs, and how common is it for PUDs to have restrictions on after hours employment?
We have several. I don't know the exact amount, 4 or 5 employees that work other jobs outside the PUD. With PUDs, I don't know the exact number, but it is common in at least the trades side of things, and even in the engineering side of things, for people to learn or augment their income by either helping or working with other individuals to secure some additional funds. It is very common in the utility industry. We have some skill sets that are usable, and in some cases, it's the significant other. In Jefferson County, it's very hard to recruit people. That's on our agenda tonight. And some of the recruiting issues we've come up with is there is very little for a significant other to come in and do once we recruited the person. So.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Kevin, my understanding is, so part of this is about us getting into the broadband business. And I suppose when we think about water and sewer and electric, the conflict of interest really doesn't come up. But when we're getting into broadband, now we've got other businesses that might look at employees in the PUD as having some sort of secret access to stuff and customer accounts, or who knows. So I can see that this will be more of an issue down the road. And I guess, what can you tell us to let the folks out there who might have their own business interests and feel like there might be a PUD employee that might somehow have secret access to information that might give them an advantage in their business? What can you tell us about what the rules are, and that situation won't exist?
So at the PUD, on the broadband, when we do a project, ultimately it is my decision whether the broadband project moves forward or not. it has been my decision since we started to add on to the B-top fiber with PUD fiber for SCADA and moving those projects forward. It was in the early days, Bob Phillips and myself, we would decide where we would build and how we would build. That has continued on. Today, it's myself and Lori Ray. I will say, since this has come up, we have put some additional things in place where this employee may not be brought into a meeting. It may be just Lori, Ray, and myself. So we are putting some additional things in place, but ultimately, there is no secrecy. We own an open access network. If there's meetings to be had with different ISPs, I'm the one who attends them. Occasionally Lori does, but no one else. So I believe there are safeguards in place, at least for today. And like I say, we don't know how things will develop at the PUD, but if things do change, it's my responsibility to come back to the board with Joel's help and explain why things have changed and why we need to do something different.
Joel, go ahead.
Sorry
Are you
about that.
muted?
Yeah, just to kind of tag along what Kevin was saying, and in terms of the process that the PUD has in the employment manual and the typical rules that apply to conflicts of interest, it's really what the PUD has in place is a very standard approach, which is, if each employee is required to report to either their manager or to Kevin about what their outside business interest is. And it's up to Kevin. So they openly disclose it. It's up to Kevin to determine whether he, as the general manager, believes that there's a conflict of interest. And ultimately, it comes before the commission like it has tonight. So this is the process in place. It's a tried and true process of disclosure and being open. And there's other obligations, just to sort of answer a little bit about what Commissioner Randall raised, that, people aren't allowed to use confidential information. So the employee has no access to that confidential information. And in this particular case, as Kevin said, and I agree with this, it's an open access network. Everybody has this. That's the idea of the network, is that it's open access. Everyone has access to the same information, and pricing is the same. So there's no benefit to anybody out there. They all get the same price. And so that's how we analyzed it.
Commissioner Collins.
And what you're saying, I think, fairly clearly is that the particular employee in question does not have access to competitors' customer list, or otherwise would have an unfair advantage in the marketplace by virtue of his employment within the PUD.
Yes.
That is correct.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other discussion on item 5.2, the PUD outside employment? I guess I would have one more question. I mean, Joel talked about, we have this in place. Is that it's in our employee handbook, this confidentiality, telling everybody, that's actually written in there. It's part of our existing policy.
Yes.
Okay.
In the current employee handbook. Yep.
Just to be clear, so if anybody wanted to follow up, they can go on the website and look at our employee handbook, and they'll be able to find that. Kevin, or maybe Jean?
Hi, Commissioner Tupper. This
Or
is
Melanie.
Melanie. I will have to look and make sure the employment manual is on the website. That I'm not sure of. So I will look into that.
I'm not sure we've posted it, nor are we required. And I think I might have something to say about that. before we post it. So.
Okay, well, that's good discussion to have then, because, you know, if we're talking about extending or adding on or creating a new policy in relation to this, we should know what we're building off of if there's something already in place. So it's truly transparent to the public as best we can.
Well, I guess just for clarity purposes, this is the process, and it is what we've done tonight. I think is about, in my view anyway, it's about as transparent as we could possibly be. We've briefed all of the commissioners openly and said what the issue is. I'm not, there's a different question that you just raised about the employee handbook, and I'm not 100% comfortable telling you right now that we ought to or not ought to post the handbook itself. So, you know, the policy is there, and it's my opinion that we've followed the policy to a T.
Thanks, Joel. I guess that's a little more discussion for staff and you to work on then at this point until you come back with something further for the commissioners. Any further discussion on this item? Not seeing any hands. So we will move on to item 5.3, the ICG meeting agenda for August 19th and the 23rd. I believe there is no meeting on the 19th. Is that part of what the discussion we want to have here?
Correct. On our website, we do show the August 19th. It was a placeholder for a possible meeting when we were trying to do some things with the EDC and the five-way agreement, but it will not be a meeting on the 19th. So the next meeting we will have is September 23rd. It is during the time of the water workshop. So I need to know if and who can attend the 13th or the 23rd meeting on September. It is at 5 o'clock, I believe.
So I intend to, unless things change, to attend the water workshop in person on the 23rd. So I would be, depending on the schedule for that day, I would have to Zoom. I believe, Kevin, you're in charge of the agenda for that meeting, and we are the facilitating entity. So if I'm unable to make it, Commissioner Collins would need to be ready to be able and make sure that we have a quorum. Again, I don't know if it matters if we, quote unquote, as the PUD have a quorum or not. So I guess we'll leave the discussion, start the discussion there.
We don't need a quorum because it's a quorum of all entities to have the meeting. There are a couple of items on the meeting that's been requested so far. And it was at the JBAT meeting, Kate Dean requested that we put forth some information on broadband and how the PUD is going to kind of proceed. And that was a request from Kate Dean. We don't have anything on the agenda other than that. Annette did start working on that yesterday, the agenda.
And we do have two more meetings at a minimum, regular board meetings. And we have two before that date. I didn't look at the calendar, but so we have more time to discuss this. Anyone else? Any thoughts? Oh, go ahead. I don't know who was first, Jeff or Ken. I'll leave it to the honors.
Jeff was first.
I think I was up first. So Kevin, when we brief the other folks on the IGC, I would just like to assume that they don't know I assume they know we've been working on broadband, but I would like us to assume that they don't know the details. So whatever sort of update we provide them, I hope that we can kind of provide our overall strategy, what we're going after and why, maybe some of the other ancillary projects we're working on, like the BPA connection, all those things. So they can kind of, so those elected officials in that group and the other managers can get an overall picture of what we're working on and why, and maybe why we're prioritizing the South County and some of the more rural areas as opposed to Port Townsend, that there's grant reasons for that. And then just to say, I'm going to plan to zoom into the Waputa Water Workshop. So we'll just plan to be available for the IGC meeting when that time comes. And my recollection, I can't remember even how many meetings they had kind of late in the day. At 5, it seemed like that water workshop wrapped up around 5 or 6 or something, but we'll see when the agenda comes out.
And I intend to participate in the water workshop remotely. So I will definitely be available for the ICG meeting. And I want to coordinate with Kevin on talking points so that I can provide a reasonably comprehensive report of our progress in terms of broadband.
Yeah, and I'll do the same too, Ken, because I may very well be available. I don't know, just be on the connectivity and what's going on. Sometimes they have awards dinner after hours, but not sure that it'll be that day in particular. I think at the moment it's not scheduled for that night, but things are always subject to change. So it's good to have a plan B. Anyone else? All right, we will move on to item 5.4, greenhouse gas reduction plan.
Okay, and I'm turning this over to Will. It's part of a grant opportunity, so Will, jump in.
Yes, so for the state grants that we're working on right now, the solar grant that I'll brief you on in just a moment, and the Public Works Board grant for broadband, they have a new requirement in there, or not quite a requirement. When Kevin and I attended the first briefing on the grant opportunity for Public Works Board, it sounded like you had to have a greenhouse gas reduction plan in place before you applied for the grant. Reading the grant language, it is more of, it's one of the factors that they will consider, although no points are assigned to it. To date, we don't have a greenhouse gas reduction plan approved by this board. Although we do take part in the Climate Action Committee, which does have their own greenhouse gas reduction plan. We could possibly decide if we wanted to sign on to that. But those would be things that it would be a nice to have for the next grant application, which is due October 1st. And Jeff is on the Climate Action Committee. Maybe he can fill in some details.
Yeah, it seems like what the Climate Action Committee is primarily doing is, when it comes to public agencies, is encouraging us to take steps to reduce our carbon emissions, and they're not necessarily telling us what we should be doing. So I think it's if we're seeing advantages to having this plan in place to get grant funding, and a lot of the reason that PUD got into the power business in the first place was that the BPA power was so much cleaner than PSE power. If it wouldn't take a lot of work to put some sort of basic plan together, I wonder if it wouldn't be to our advantage to do so. And I'm just thinking out loud. It's like, well, we've got our power sector. We could document how clean the power we're providing is, and, what our other emissions are, or at least, I would assume it's mostly, the vehicles that we drive. And, but I don't know that we want to say, yeah, let's just take whatever plan the Climate Action Committee has. I think we should take the lead on whatever we decide we want to do.
Joel, your hands up.
Thank you. Yeah. And, I would just so happen today, I was looking at the Clean Energy Transition Act, and there is a provision here that come January 1st, 2022, every consumer-owned utility must develop and submit a 4-year clean energy implementation plan. So whether we know it or not, this is part of our work plan for the rest of the year. And maybe, Will, I don't know, maybe that's something you're working on already, but it would seem that the greenhouse gas part of it may be something we want to include in that. And it's probably something, and I hadn't had a chance to talk to Kevin about this today at all, but it seems timely to bring up all this. So,
hey, Joel, what was the law that was associated with? Could you say that again?
Yeah, the CETA, the Clean Energy Transition Act.
And I will say, I spoke with Commissioner Dean from the county, and they are the county and the city, the greenhouse gas inventory plan that they did, Jeff, you're aware of that plan. And then they've updated it to have their reduction strategies in there. So they're considering that their equivalent plan. When I first spoke with them, we're like, well, you could use that too. You guys are part of that committee. But it would have to be formally adopted by our board. When I did some research on other plans that have been published and adopted, they're pretty extensive. It looks like it's something we'd want to have put out an RFP and hire a consultant to help draft. So it would be just a process of looking at how we wanted to go out. If we could sign on, do we want to? What kind of process we want to take? So just bringing that up to put it out there in the.
Okay, well, I can take a closer look at that, and that may be something that we want to add to our agenda once we have a look at that plan to see what it would mean for us if we were to just adopt that.
I do want to preface this by there may be some urgency to get at least part of this done for the grant opportunities. It would be terrible if we came down to the wire and the determining factor is whether we had a plan or not. So I do see a little urgency here. Not that it has to be the final plan or what has to happen in the future, but maybe we can attack it a couple different ways. Will can come back with some options for everyone.
I think that crafting our own plan is probably the best way forward. And I'm sure the other electric utilities are going to have to deal with this. So the association may already be doing some work along this lines, or other utilities that we might be able to just check with them and see. Someone might already have something, in the can that we can look at, and, especially if it's another preference customer, maybe we can just do that as a starting point, ask that question of the association. And we already know some of the stuff in our strategic plan, we already allude to the things we want to do moving forward, and probably in our 4-year work plan and our 10-year water plan as well. I think we could probably pick components out of that. And then we know fleet, we've always talked about fleet going to electric vehicles and that sort of thing. So I think all the components we have it in front of us, just a matter of coalescing it all into some kind of a quick and dirty document for Kevin if there's an urgency. Go ahead, Ken.
Actually, Jeff was first.
Thank you. And I'm thinking back to what's in that plan, and I think it's been around a while. And I think actually once we went to BPA power, that it really jumped us ahead in terms of where we wanted to be. And I think it's really a county-wide plan. And as I was talking about having our own plan, I was thinking, okay, the county-wide plan's fine. It doesn't really say what we as a utility should be specifically doing to reduce our PUD emissions, which I think is still something we need to do. But it's very possible, Kevin, that adopting that plan would be fine and wouldn't cause any ruffles, because it's a general plan. It has general targets, and then the Climate Action Committee has documented our progress on it, and we're ahead of schedule simply because of going from PSC power to BPA power. That's my recollection, and I saw Will's head nodding also. So we could, I think the answer could be both. We could potentially adopt a plan to get compliance, but then to have meaningful action and to help provide guidance to our organization, we may want to have some additional steps, even in just our annual work plan or budget or who knows what.
I agree with Commissioner Toper that there may be some assistance available through WAPUTA, but I would also think, since this is really their bailiwick, that PPC may be able to provide some specific assistance for preference customers, many of whom are PPC members. And PPC is well staffed. They've got some very bright people working for them. They have several attorneys, and this may have already come up. So I think it's a question worth asking.
Thanks, Ken. Anyone else? Your hands, okay, Ken took his hand down. Anyone else on item 5.4 greenhouse reduction plan? Staff, any final thoughts or? You got enough direction? All right, 2 thumbs up, at least 2 thumbs up. Let's go to 5.5, solar panel grant opportunity.
Yeah, this State Department of Commerce has an opportunity to apply for public agencies to apply to put solar panels on their roofs to reduce their energy footprint. It's a net metering grant. It's not a community solar grant. The grant opportunities are up to $500,000. It's a 50-50 match. But there's only, I can't see the total pool here. There's only $3.5 million available. So it's going to be small awards per winner. So we've been kind of looking to put together an application over the last month, and I'm finalizing the details in the last couple of days. Scott and I have been working to get the numbers. I've been working with Bonneville Environmental Foundation. They did all the scoping for the site and the production, things like that. What we'd be looking at ideally would be 100 kilowatt system, which is the largest that you can apply for. The total project cost would be around $216,000. You get more points if you are 50-50 is the minimum. If you go over the minimum, you get a few more points. So we'd be looking at doing 216, asking for 100. The grant gives more points for lower cost per kilowatt, and then for payback. The payback is where our application is the weakest, partly because we don't have a great history on our energy bills for this building. Our last year, it wasn't really occupied, and it's only past information you can use in applying for the grant. And then years previous, it was a much smaller building. So we're looking at that. The payback for the total project, I think, is around 30 years. Our own payback would be about half of that for the amount we're investing. Any other questions?
So I have a couple questions on this one. You just talked about the payback. I'm not exactly sure how to quantify that exactly what you're saying there. Do we need a cost benefit analysis on this? I guess what I'm asking, is this really going to save the ratepayers money in the long run when you look at the amount of match that may be required and the actual savings? Obviously, the building's more efficient. It's bigger, but it's more efficient now. So it kind of seems like we should have, if we're putting in for this, should have done a little bit of thinking along some sort of, like I say, a cost benefit analysis. I don't want this to be a symbolic gesture. In other words, if we're going to spend this money, we need to know that it really is the best use of the money, and that we're going to get a return on it. Commissioner Collins, and if staff wants to
Yes.
tackle that.
So I think you're right in asking for some sort of projection as to how this would eventually pay for itself. I do think that there is a benefit to even gestures that are symbolic, but be that as it may, it seems to me that there may be an additional benefit if we have to prove that we're lowering our carbon footprint. This would certainly be an ideal way to do it. So it might dovetail nicely for us.
Jeff?
I was going to add to that I can't remember, Kevin, if you had talked about planning to put a few type 2 EV chargers on site, the simple 240 volt, relatively inexpensive chargers on site. We would be able to say, hey, the electricity, roughly 100,000 kilowatt hours would be coming from a solar array. So clean energy that way. And for you two fellas, this is what I used to do. I used to put together those payback analyses. So what Will is saying is, if the total cost of the system is $216,000, that the project is projected to generate $216,000 worth of electricity over 30 years. But because half of the project would be paid, roughly half would be paid for by a grant, now you've cut your payback from 30 years to roughly 15 years. And the lifespan of one of these systems, the inverters last about 15 years, but they're a small part of it. The solar panels are expected to last 30 to 50 years. So this is a project that would bring benefits to the customers after that period of time. So it would make money for the customers.
Any other hands or any other discussion on this one? I assume we're going to get an update at the next meeting on this, or is this what, again, the timeline? I see Scott Bancroft. Go ahead, Scott. Are you muted, Scott?
Hey, everybody. Hey, everybody. I just wanted to say just real quick that I think this solar project for our building would be fantastic because it sets an example to the people of the community that we're willing to put out our hard-earned money to make this happen. And I honestly believe that payback would be sooner because I've been kind of doing some analysis on residential, and I think it would actually be a little bit sooner than we think on that payback. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Again, to staff, I think it would be good to have those numbers or those projections somewhere where the public can see it up front. So as we're doing this, they can be, right in real time going along with us and be in the same boat we are for understanding, probability and outcome.
We can have a report the next meeting or another date.
Thanks, Will. Anyone else? All right, we will move on to item 5.6, the calendar, which was moved from earlier on out of the consent, or was it out of the consent? Or was it earlier in your report, Kevin? Anyhow, 5.6, calendar.
And I really have a specific date, August 23rd, the BOC and the CAB tentatively is scheduled for the joint meeting to review the meter information. I just want to make sure we were going to start the meeting at 2:30 instead of 2, and it would probably go to 4:30, maybe a pinch later. I just wanted to make sure all 3 commissioners were still available for that meeting.
Yes.
Commissioner go ahead. This Commissioner Tupper, I don't know what kind of connectivity I'll have. I'll be out of town that day. So again, Commissioner Collins may very well wind up facilitating the board part of that meeting. Just depends on whether I can get in or not. So it's a little bit farther out yet for my schedule to know exactly what my attendance will be, but I am going to make the attempt.
And I am available.
I'm also available.
Okay. Hopefully,
And again, Kevin, I'll coordinate as we get closer to that date.
Awesome. We're gonna, there was a question whether how we would advertise. We're going to advertise it as a BOC meeting. The CAB will be there, and Gordon will, with FCS, Gordon Wilson, will do a presentation to the CAB. Hopefully we can get some direction and move forward. It should be a good meeting. So really that was the only thing I had on the calendar, but that was an important one for Annette to get squared around.
All right. Any other questions on the calendaring of the meeting for the joint meeting for the 23rd? All right. We will move on to old business. For the old and new business section discussions, please hold public comment until each presentation is done, but before we take any vote. With that, 6.1, sewer rates.
And
That's
Sam,
Samantha?
yep, Sam is going to be the presenter here. Good luck, Sam.
Thank you, Kevin. That was a fun handoff. Will, would you mind if I could share my screen for the sewer rate review presentation part, please?
You're free to do so.
Thank you. Okay, so hopefully everybody could see my screen here. This was created by Sergey, who is not with us tonight, but he's with us in spirit. And I'm Samantha Harper. I'm the PUD's engineering director. And just a little bit of background before we get started. We've been working with FCS for about a year to do all of our utility rates, and our last one to complete is our wastewater rate study. And elements of this study include a review of our current wastewater rates, the minimal capital improvement plan that we have to date, the cost to maintain and run the wastewater utility, and trying to begin to bring the wastewater rates up to a sustainable manner. And so on July 20th, 2021, we met with the Board of Commissioners to talk. It was a joint meeting between the PUD and FCS staff to review the wastewater services that the PUD provides, and then also to propose the rates. And through that cost of service and direction from the board, we've divided the rates into 3 categories: a standard rate, a Beckett point rate, and a Cala point rate. And we also are going to present the analysis that we heard last time of a phase-in approach to getting to a cost of service for the 3 rates at a 3-year, a 5-year, a 7-year, and a 10-year phase-in for all 3. So without further ado, we will go to, unless I can't work my slideshow. And so this also summarizes what we talked about. And today's focus is really going to be on finalizing which of the 3 phase-in options that the commissioners would like staff to move forward with. And so this is all of the phase-ins on one sheet here. At the very top, it's the standard rate. And as you see on the top side is the amounts that Sergey presented if we went to the rates right in this first year of for the standard rate of $74.62 of a Beckett point rate of $104, and then a Cala point rate of $43.23. And so this second category or tier down in this tan highlight is a 3-year phase-in to bring the rates to this 2021 option. And then the next one is the 5-year rate, and then the 7-year rate, and then all the way to phasing it in for a 10-year rate. And staff would like to propose kind of a jumping off point of recommending the 3-year phase-in. And that's kind of just the kicking off point for discussion with staff and the board. So if there is any questions from the commissioners.
Not seeing any hands of yet, Samantha. I guess I would ask one question on your previous page. Was there any thought given to, separating the standard group into maybe 2 groups instead of 1? I know that came up, I think, in last time's discussion. You pretty much settled that its standard is all going to be the 1 group. Is Samantha muted?
Dan, yeah, I'm not sure. I didn't hear from Sam, so I'll jump.
Okay, yes.
Oh, go ahead,
Yes.
Sam.
I was doing really well, but only my dog heard me. But you go first, Kevin.
Part of this is just how do you pull out the standards and make it where you actually have enough information to say this is group 1 and group 2. How that would almost be impossible. So to keep them together, at least on our record keeping system, is probably the only way we can do it at this date.
Correct.
Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, exactly. From past data, we don't have enough data to break this out anymore than we already have. And our standard rate customers, we provide all the same service from the effluent of their septic tank to the drain field. So besides where they're geographically located, they're all on the same playing field in that respect.
Thanks. I just wanted to reiterate that to anyone who might listen in on this discussion that listened to before. Go ahead. I think it was Jeff first.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really, you guys did a great job on, or maybe, FCS did a great job on breaking these out and giving us some options and information. I guess the other alternative is the postage stamp alternative, which is treating everybody the same, treat the division as one division, and the costs get broken out on the average cost of what it requires to serve a sewer customer. And we do that with electricity because you imagine it would be impossible to try and create different classes for residential customers in Port Townsend and on the coil and everything else. But what we're saying here is there's some logic that we can track the numbers at this level. And it's almost like thinking of these as, when we talk about electricity, it's like different rate classes. Like we've got our commercial rate and our residential rate, that there's really enough differences between Collar Point and Beckett Point and everybody else that we can kind of lump them together that way. And I suppose on another element of this, it's kind of fairness. You know, we could do it the postage stamp way, or we have the data to do it this way. And then it's just a matter of how quickly do we catch up over time, which is right now, you know, really wonderfully priced rates, but rates that are not covering the cost of operating the systems, and we're not being responsible in managing it that way. So I just wanted to bring that up, that the alternative is the postage stamp rate. But and I think what very well could happen is customers could, you know, probably from Beckett Point could say, hey, how come ours is so much more expensive? So do we have the information that we can provide to our customers to show, well, here's why the Beckett Point rate is this. You've only got X number of customers, and you've got a cost, you know, the cost of operating the system or this. And the commissioners decided to segregate these systems. Can you talk a little bit about the information you have that we can share with people and explain why the rates would be different if we go down this path?
Yes, I will start off, and Kevin, you can jump in. So we do break our systems out through a work order process just for tracking amounts, and there is a Collar Point and a Beckett Point, and then there's a standard rate. So we can provide that information as best as we have. And then there's just a level of administration that we spread across all three of these categories. So we can give them the analysis to, at least so they can see how we got to this point.
Any follow-up, Jeff, or do we want to move to Ken? Commissioner Collins.
Yes. The question I have is that I'm wondering, as we look at the different phase-in plans, what is the difference in the net revenue to the PUD? Because it's clear, I think, that until the rates rise up to the level of being equivalent to the costs, that the water side of the water and sewer business is subsidizing the sewer side. So do we readily have figures that would let us know what's in effect the loss to the PUD based on implementing the different plans?
I think it's at the bottom of page 4, Ken. So staff can correct me if I'm wrong. If you want to go to the next slide, or yeah, right there, 402. I'm assuming that's what that number meant.
Correct. And this is for the 3-year phase in, and we have them. I would have to go, I'd have to leave this, the slide that's open, and we have them for the 5, the 7, and the 10-year. And as it's exponentially gets larger as we, as the phase in takes longer to get to cost of service.
And that number is spread out over the 3 years, correct, Samantha? The 402.
Correct.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the 402 refers to the 3-year phase-in, is that correct?
That is correct.
And what you're saying is that compared to the 5 or 7 or 10-year phase-in, that subsidy would be substantially larger.
Yes. And I can give you I can provide those numbers because I have them. If you don't mind, I can stop sharing and I can get those for you right now. If you would like to keep the discussion going, and I can pull those slides up.
Whatever you're comfortable with is fine with me.
So again, I would point at this water subsidy, and this is kind of the problem with postage stamp type things too, is you have people who aren't receiving the service who are having to take care of their own sewer or septic costs and responsibilities, subsidizing other people. And that to me is just not equitable. It's not fair. And, we're talking about 400 sewer customers here. I understand it's a small number, and that has an upside and a downside to it when you look at subsidies, or you look at, how many people are actually really affected by these rates. Jeff?
Thank you. So as I look at that slide, what I think I'm seeing is that it's saying with the existing rates, the subsidy is $205,000. Is that the correct way to read this thing?
Where did you see that number, Jeff?
I hope I'm looking at this right. So we're on, I'm looking at my own screen now, so I'm not even
Here,
sure
I'll go back.
I'm on. Yeah,
If everybody could see the slides again.
so the estimated annual subsidy in the bottom row, it says 205,208, and I think that's intended to line up with the existing rates. And then when you go to the next one, it looks like it's, again, assuming that we're doing a 3-year phase in. Is that right? So that then in the second year, the subsidy would drop to 130.
Correct.
Then a third year it'd be 65, and then in the fourth year we'd be at parity. We wouldn't have a subsidy. So if that's reading it right, then the current subsidy is about 205,000. And if we look at a 10-year thing, then basically it would be 20 grand a year that we'd be roughly reducing the subsidy, or, you can do any multiple of it. But so is that right? 205,000 a year currently?
That is correct.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, that's helpful.
And to a previous question, the Beckett point system is a different system. It's an actual pressure pumps and grinders and biofilter type of a thing, correct, Samantha?
It is a different system. All of the customers have their own individual grinder pumps, and everybody pumps up to the top of the hill, and then we have a large system up there, and then we pump it again to the drain fields. And CaliPoint is a mixture. It is not all, some of it's gravity fed and some of it is pressurized. So unlike Beckett Point, the whole system is pressurized. CaliPoint is a blend of those two, and it's more gravity than pressurized. So they're not a direct comparison for that reason.
Thank you. Jeff, do you still have a question, or is that a old?
No, I do. So you mentioned some of the complexity of the Beckett point system. The grinder pumps that are closest to the customer, are those maintained by the customer or by the PUD?
By the PUD.
Okay, so we have a lot of complex stuff we're taking care of there, and then you've got all the electricity for all that stuff too. So that does, and then I don't know how many customers are down in Beckett Point, if there's 50 or, it's relatively few for the complexity of the system.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Keep going.
Go ahead. How many?
There's about 100.
About 100. Okay, so it's more than you think. And I remember that whole system went in because of a huge public health issue that was going on with failing septics super close to the water down there. So, okay, that answered my question.
So are we back to Samantha?
Yes, I'll show the cumulative subsidy for for year 5.
%50 increase
I
for 2 more years.
And then if everybody's ready here, is year 7.
And the further we go out, it's not only the subsidy, but also we're looking at, the price of materials and labor and everything too. Is that all baked into this, Samantha, with these rates that we're talking about?
I want to make sure I understand. We do have a little bit of a 2.5% increase we're putting into the numbers as the year goes on, just to kind of keep up, but it's a very modest amount.
Yeah, what
if
I'm
that's the
thinking
answer to your
is-
question.
Well, yeah, I think it kind of does. I don't know that we know that we're being accurate enough looking that far out. My guess is that we're not being aggressive enough at looking, we're going to keep losing ground we're going to be paying increased subsidies from the water side and losing ground on the cost of, providing the service. That's kind of my take of how I'm looking and seeing this.
And then just so we show all the years, and then here's the 10-year phase in and the cumulative subsidy.
So if we were out 7 years, we'd be looking at roughly double the amount of subsidization dollars.
Correct. Yes, because it was about 400,000. So yes, correct.
Samantha, could you remind us the total number of sewer customers again? I remember that was in the previous presentation. I just can't remember now.
We have 357.
So anything else with the presentation, Sam? You want to move on off of this, or is there more discussion on this, on the alternatives?
This concludes the presentation portion and the data that we have. Then our next step, what I would like to see is just if there is a recommendation or if there's more information that's needed, just so that we can keep the conversation moving into adopting a wastewater rate increase.
Commissioner Randall has a question again.
Yeah, one more question. Do we have, and I realize these are the roughest estimates because the system isn't built yet, but what are the estimated costs on the tri-area sewer for customers, for residential customers? Do we have any sort of comparison numbers? I'm just kind of wondering, is that going to create another customer class potentially on the sewer side?
It could potentially. I must admit, I don't know enough about it to give you a very good answer at the moment. So if it's possible, I would like to reserve that until another time.
Okay.
I don't even know to take a guess, to be.
The more money the county
honest with
gets,
you.
the less it'll cost each customer. That's kind of how you're going to have to look at it. And they've got 22 million at the moment on a $30 million project.
It does bring up one of our topic discussions of our memo of understanding, and that's kind of the next phase is to get into answering those questions.
So are
Yeah,
you,
Go ahead, Ken.
Samantha, are you looking for a vote this evening on the rates?
I would like a direction so that we could bring back a resolution and a wastewater rate sheet for the actual vote and approval of the wastewater rates. So a recommendation of the phase-in plan is what I am looking for tonight.
And just for added information, with Jeff, I'm pretty certain that the Hadlock sewer is supposed to conclude construction, if things go the way it's supposed to, in 2024, which is 3 years. So the two things would mesh up and marry up in that aspect, that we could reevaluate and look at what's going on with the Hadlock sewer versus our own sewer systems at that point. If we go 5 years and it's not going to match up. I'll just say, I don't see us going 7 or 10 years. That's what got us in this predicament. So I'll just throw that out there. I'm really not in favor of anything beyond 5 years at this point. 3 makes more sense, but that's kind of where I'm at in the decision-making process. It's going to be harsh and hard no matter what we do.
Yeah, I my looking at those numbers, the Beckett Point one is the one that has the biggest jump. 3 years, the jump is a little steep, I thought, and I was leaning towards 5 years or longer myself. So I would be okay with 5 years. That's where I'm at right now.
And I'm basically in agreement with that. I think that you've got a significant retirement community and part-time resident community at Beckett Point. So I'd like to soften it a little bit and go with 5 rather than 3. I understand that that requires some additional subsidization by the water side of the business, but that seems to me to be a fair approach, and to not be insensitive either to the impact on Calla Point, which is not as large, but still, again, you've got people there whose incomes are fixed, and I'd like to allow a 5-year phase-in period, because I think that is reasonable, and it's going to be easier for people to absorb.
I don't disagree with what the two commissioners have said. I just reiterate, that's $150,000 a year for 5 years that I guess, if math is close, somewhere in that vicinity, a little more than that we're going to be subsidizing the water customers. Again, I don't know. We talk about fairness. Is that fair to the water customers who don't have these, these systems? And then again, marrying this up, if we move forward with the Hadlock sewer, I think we're going to revisit this before 5 years anyways. That's a guess, not knowing what the future holds with that system or our involvement. Obviously, we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but I think I'm in the 3-year camp. But if you're looking for 2 to 1 at the moment for 5 versus 3.
Can I jump in real quick? Is there any appetite to go 3 for the 2 and 5 for the other one? Because Beckett Point does have the bigger increases. Again, we're kind of splitting things out. It would soften the blows for Beckett Point.
An interesting compromise. Staff wanted to work on that. I'd be interested to see how that worked out. Jeff, you've had your hand up for a bit.
I was on a different screen. Yeah, I thought about that, because the increases for Calla Point are small, under that, and the increases for standard are, I think I'm off that screen now. Let's see, now we go back to it. Yeah, it's like $16 a month, or $16 a year increase per each month. That would be a compromise between kind of what Dan's saying and what Ken and I are saying. And the reason I'm in favor of kind of the 5-year and looking at the Beckett Point side of things is we've had these sewer rates for a long time. And we go back to prior to the electric side, it was the city of Port Townsend customers who got no service from the PUD, who were part of paying the property taxes, and the property taxes were part of balancing the fact that the water side wasn't paying what it should pay and the sewer side wasn't either. So I just look at this as we're trying to get to rates that really reflect the cost of providing the services. We've been off for a long time. We finally got our first rate study on sewer, and it's almost like we're putting on the brakes to slow down the damage and get back to where we should be. And I think being aware of how much that increase is per customer class, I think is fair. So I would be okay with 3 years on standard in Calla Point and 5 years on Beckett Point. If Joel was comfortable with that, we'd be treating, those different customers differently. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Joel.
I do. And I think as long as there's a a material basis for the distinction. And, we'd probably, and this is more directed to Samantha, we'd probably have to craft that in the resolution in some way, so that the record's clear. I'm fine with that. I mean, we're either 3 years or 5 years for all three of these systems. You're getting back to cost of service, and that's where you want to be. So I don't think there's a true horizon that you have to meet it at, but you put your stake in the sand for each of these. So I'm comfortable with that.
So I don't know if we'd want to come back with a resolution quite yet. Then do we want more information to see how that compromise with the two make out, or can we just see it on the paper here tonight? Are the commissioners comfortable with looking at that and still getting the resolution next time? Ken, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know the details, and going right back to what Joel has said, it seems to me difficult to find a convincing material basis to justify phasing in one customer group over a 3-year period and another customer group or groups over a 5-year period. The optics of that seem to me to say that we're really being preferential, and that makes me somewhat uncomfortable. I think the choice ought to be that either everybody's 3 years or everybody's 5 years. And we're otherwise, I think, in alignment with increasing to the actual costs of service for each system. And I just don't think we can readily justify that kind of distinction, and without it being obvious that we're simply trying to soften the dollar blow to a particular customer group. But the reverse of that is that for years and years and years, Beckett Point has been heavily subsidized to a greater extent than Calipoint or the standard customers. And I think we need to bear that into our perspective on this. And I don't have anything more to say on it.
So Ken, I'm not clear. Did you end up deciding that you weren't comfortable with splitting the 3 and the 5 in between the different classes? Is that where you landed?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, that still brings me back to why I'm more in favor of the 3 if you wanted to maintain balance. But really, when you look at how each of the 3 different groups, they're already, unbalanced. I mean, we're just trying to make an effort to make it somewhat equitable for all 3 systems moving forward by trying to, do a hybrid thing here of a 5 for one system and 3 for the other 2. So I still like that hybrid mentality. Again, we have to communicate and message to the community what we're doing and why we're doing it, regardless if we do that or if we go with the 3 or the 5. Nothing's going to be popular at the end of the day. I don't like kicking the can down the road anymore or any further at this point. And it's going to be painful, but we need to keep in mind it's 350 customers. Like I said, there's an upside to being small and there's a downside to being small. So Jeff, you're back to being the rubber vote, I guess.
I'm for 5, and we're making the situation better every year, and we're spreading it over 5 years, and that's where I land. It's been going on a long time, and I'm in favor of the 5-year.
So staff has some direction. The look at that $800,000 in water subsidy, I have a hard time with that, but at 5 years is what it's looking like. Ken, I saw your hand for a second. Did you want back in?
So that works for me to do 5 years.
Thank you. We will bring it back with a 5-year phase-in. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so where were we at here? I lost my sheet. Okay, that was sewer rates. Any further discussion on the sewer rates? Now, we're going to see that on the agenda, Kevin, not in the consent, correct?
Correct. That will be on the agenda for next meeting.
All right, so any other questions or comments on item 6.1, the sewer rates? Not seeing any hands, we will move on to item 6.2, employee tuition reimbursement policy. I imagine that's Melanie.
It is Melanie. Oh, there she is.
Yeah. Yep, I'm here. So this item is a follow-up from our meeting on August 3rd. We presented a proposed tuition reimbursement policy. The board came to consensus that we wanted to add a payback provision into this policy. So we did work on that, and what we came up with is a payback provision based on how long an employee stays with the district, and there's a correlating percentage. So if an employee terminates within 12 months of completing their course or program, they will owe 100% back to the PUD. If they terminate 13 to 24 months after the program is complete, they would owe 66%. And within 25 to 36 months of completing the program, they would owe 33% back to the PUD. And there is some language in that form to the tuition reimbursement approval form. And it's in the policy as well that if you terminate within that amount of time, then the PUD does have the right to collect that money from the final paycheck. So if this payback provision is sufficient for the board, we would like to move forward with implementing this new policy. And if there's any questions, I can take those now.
So Melanie is Commissioner Tupper. So it kind of looking at that and looking at the payback provisions and the percentages, it kind of looks to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, like kind of doing the math that someone could run up maybe like a $4,000 or $5,000 worth of that reimbursement. And if they were to leave and had to pay back and there weren't enough coming back, say they had a $2,000 paycheck and they owed us $4,000 or $5,000, how are we going to get that money? It's kind of like the electric side when people default.
Yeah, so and we did add language into the policy about that. If there is not enough funds on the employee's final paycheck to cover those costs, then the PUD would, basically the employee would have to write a check to the PUD to pay back those funds. In the policy though, the maximum amount that we can reimburse per year is $2,500. So, in a year they wouldn't have 5,000, but I understand the question of if they do owe that 2,500, that is a big chunk of change. But because we have this provision in place, we can ask for the money back on their final paycheck, or like I said, if they can't cover it, we would ask them to write a check to the PUD.
That was the only question I had, was if there was a fairly substantial amount. I see Scott has his hand up.
Hello, everyone. I just want to tell you, I was an adult learner and got a couple of associate degrees and a bachelor's degree on night school through my employer, my previous employer. And the way it worked is you would take the classes and pay for them yourself, and you submit a reimbursement form after the classes were done, and it was proven that you got a C or a better, and then they paid you back. You never got too far in arrears. It was always quarter by quarter or semester by semester, whatever the system is based on. So I don't think that would be an issue.
Thanks, Scott. Anyone else? I see the language was cleaned up in the form that it says Jefferson PUD now.
Yes, that correction was made.
Any other questions or comments on this? Were you looking for resolution on this tonight?
We are, yes.
So if there's no further discussion or questions, I guess I could entertain a motion unless we need to see this again. This is old business. This is a second touch. Jeff?
So yeah, I think I can make a motion if I can get in the right spot here. So it looks like we're looking, I'll just make a motion to authorize the employee tuition reimbursement policy as presented by staff.
And I'll second that.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded to accept as it was presented tonight for the employee tuition reimbursement policy. Any further questions or comments? All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous. With that, we will move on to item 6.3, budget update.
Okay. Oh, there you are, Mike. Mike is going to
I'm
do a
here.
budget update. So, and Mike's at his MIP class. So Mike is away from us a little bit.
Yeah, it's getting late here for me. So just wanted to give a quick update. Last Monday on August 9th, we did a workshop with the board, met with the board, got some ideas, kind of gave you guys an idea of what we were looking at. We also had Moss Adams do the 10-year forecast plan, that we're planning on making a part of the 2022 budget. Just some dates to keep in mind is we have to have a draft budget posted to our website by Monday, September 6th, and then we'll have our budget hearing on Monday, October 4th. Right now, we're currently reviewing the numbers and putting together wish lists for departments, reviewing capital needs for work projects and equipment. Just another reminder to the board that we're gonna, due to unusual long lead times, we're ordering items now that will be paid for in 2022 and be included in the budget. So after the meeting on August 9th, there's still a few things outstanding that we still will need board input, whether it's tonight or here in a couple of weeks, we'll actually probably have a regular budget update with the more accurate numbers. But some of the things that we need to take a look at is the tax revenues. Right now, we're going to leave them at 0% increase. I did provide the commissioners with what the 1% tax increase looks like. And what that means that the 1% is only on our portion of it. And then the other discussion that needs to be done is, should the property back taxes be split amongst the utilities, or as staff recommends, have them all go to broadband? We're going to use the 10-year financial forecast in the budget process, and we'll have that available as we go through the budget with the board. So if there's different scenarios we need to look at, we can kind of show how that works. Again, we're ordering items that will be paid for in 2022. And as we go through, you guys had requested some additional information on financing. As we get a little bit more detail, we haven't got all that set because we're still waiting to hear on some of the grant stuff, how that's going to affect the budget and going forward. And then we are still reviewing the BPA rates and the possible reinstatement of surcharges and how that will affect the beauty. So this is just information kind of let you know where the status of where we're at. So hopefully the last week of August, the first little bit of September, we'll be able to have a special meeting and have actual numbers for the board. And actually can get that to you even before then. So that's the update on the budget.
Jeff?
Yeah, this is a small thing. Wish list to me is kind of like Christmas list for a kid. I wouldn't use that in budgeting. I would say, budget request for, this department has these budget requests for next year. I don't, because we have to go get that money in rates from folks. So I wouldn't use that. It's just a very small thing, but sounds great. Sounds like we're on track again for getting our budget done early and responsibly. So thank you so much. I don't have any questions. And sounds like that property tax increase question that we had about how much of that we would take, you're going to get that to us later, what that would be.
I did send out some information last week about that.
Okay.
The 1%, Ken had asked about the 1%. That only affects our levy, our tax levy. It doesn't affect the overall. I think the 1% on a $300,000 tax value, assessed value, was like 24 cents.
Okay.
Per $1,000.
Thank you.
I don't have it right in front of me tonight, but I think overall, if we took our 17% capacity per $1,000, it was like 4 something, and that may have been the overall. I can't remember. It wasn't a whole lot because our tax levy's pretty small.
Thanks for that reminder.
You're welcome. And the reason we use the wish list is because the departments put it together, and then we kind of hack at it until we get down to a reasonable. They give us everything they want. Kevin and I will review it and hack it down to a reasonable, so we don't have to raise rates any more than what are already raised. So that's the reason we call it wish lists. I see where you're coming from, Jeff.
So Mike and Kevin's Commissioner Tupper. So I know at the end of, last process, last year, it came up and I was one of the ones who brought it up of getting a little bit more granular look at this time around. Now the 6th is coming up pretty quick. And I don't know what exactly you plan on presenting at that time. I think we need a little more than what we've seen in the past of just department total. I know we do fleet and we do electric, we do water. I think I would like to see us a little, I'm not asking to know where every paperclip's going or that type of thing, but I do think we should be a little more informative about each department, in some way, shape, or form, whether it's, this is labor and this is material. I mean, I'll kind of leave it to you guys to maybe come up with how we can do that or what it would look like. But I really don't just want to see what I normally see of, 560,000 to broadband and, 1.5 million to the yard. I'd like to see a little more granular information this time around.
Okay. I think we did a little bit. We did start out with just the water, electric, and water last year. We did kind of show where some of those expenses, how they were broken down between labor and stuff, if I remember right. And with some graphs and stuff, and that will be done again this year. It wasn't necessarily department by department, but it was overall broken down by categories.
Like I say, I'll leave it to your imagination at the moment. We'll see what we get on the 6th, I guess. So,
okay.
I'm not exactly sure the ask I'm making there, how that works for you guys, but I do want to see us a little bit deeper dive than what we usually see at that point in the process over the past year or two.
Okay.
It was interesting. I remember last year, it seems like we had information like comparing water to electric on just how much of their budget went to staffing compared to electric. Those numbers are really helpful to show the size and the number of customers we have and explains a lot of the differences between departments. But yeah, anything else that you can provide that really tells the story of what these departments are doing, because how they spend their money tells their story, and how you can help them do that, I think helps us.
Okay, we will definitely take a look at it.
Go ahead, Ken, was that a thumbs up or a hand up?
Well, it wasn't a hand out, it was a thumbs up.
So I guess getting back to the other items that you had, on the property taxes, I think we were in somewhat consensus, if I remember, that we don't want to exercise the, banked capacity. Are we still in that camp? I guess, I don't know, are you still looking for that, Kevin and Mike?
We do. Right now we're going to plan on the 0% increase, but if the board, because that's kind of the consensus that we had on last Monday, the 9th, was leave it at the 0, maybe using the 1%, depending on how that all worked out. When I did talk to the county, they're still working on some new construction stuff. before they can even get preliminary numbers out to us. So we're gonna have to have most of our budget done probably before we get any type of preliminary numbers from the county assessor's office. So right now, I think Kevin and I are just gonna leave it at 0% increase unless the board comes back with some type of different direction to use it, to increase it.
So I have another question looking forward on our low income, subsidies or rates and that sort of thing, of how we're going to deal, broadband coming up as well would dovetail into this, on how we're going to account for monies that we're going to put out there as low income assistance or subsidies, and looking at the arrearages that we're going to face. I would throw out there that maybe, again, a portion of our property taxes might be better served to going to help mitigate the arrearages or our low income commitments. I think there's other things that money should and could do without destroying anything as it relates to broadband that we should seriously consider at this point. Jeff.
Just as a reminder, and maybe Gene can help me with this, but when the base rate was increased a few years ago, I can't remember if that was 2016, there was a couple dollars of that were added on to fund the low income discount, and that funded up to a certain amount. I can't remember if that was around $500,000 or what that was. And I know Gene provided numbers that projected that it could actually go over that at some point. But for many, many years, we've collected more money than we've handed out in low income. So I don't think that should be a basis for redistributing the property tax money. I still feel really strongly that we should keep it together, keep it in broadband, because that can leverage a lot, excuse me, a lot more money. But I don't think the low income is up as a basis for it, because we increase base rates to cover the low income up to a certain amount.
And I guess we're probably due for somewhat of an accounting of where we are with how many customers are in that group now, as opposed to what it was 3, 4, 5 years ago when that rate increase was set to that. So and then, like I said, the arrearages issue, that's something we're gonna start figuring that out here in a month. What's going to happen with all that? So if that money isn't going to come out of some of it out of property taxes, it's coming from somewhere else, and that somewhere else has got to be rates and fees. So as the budget gets crafted, we need to identify where those revenues to cover those kind of things in the budget are going to be coming from. Ken?
I was reading this morning that our consultant in his blog has said that the funding opportunities for broadband effectively are a once in a lifetime opportunity, that there's never been this kind of money available, and there probably never will be again. So I want to hold that money from our taxing authority available for matching funds. And I don't think it's necessary to stress at this point how important broadband is to our community. And unfortunately, given the resurgence of COVID in our community, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think that our lives are going to be affected by this for a significant period of time to come, with everything that goes with that, as far as the value of virtual meetings with medical personnel. I think to some extent with education. Again, hard to say what's going to happen, but the trends simply are not good. So it just underscores the importance right now of having those funds available so that we can apply them for matching grants and build out the system to the maximum extent possible.
Jeff?
Yeah, I agree with what Ken's saying there on the use of the property tax for the broadband grant matches. I do have a question that, Dan, you brought up a good point on the arrearages, and I do have a question for Gene or Kevin. Or are you going to give us an update on where we stand on arrearages, and are we seeing any progress with customers availing themselves of the help that OLICAP has? Is there any report you can give us now, or can you give it to us at the next regular board meeting just to see if the problem is getting worse, or are we gaining ground, or what's the status?
I can bring you a report at the next board meeting. I can also email you some information of where we stand with the low income. Not seeing us gain a whole lot of ground. It's not looking good.
Yeah, and I appreciate everything that both commissioners have said, but I will, again, the broadband won't do them any good, Ken, if we have to shut their power and water off because they can't even meet those simple things to begin with. So it all ties together at the end of the day, and it's about priorities. And we're already looking at the sewer increases, the water increases, and the power increases. I understand the importance of broadband. I'm all for expanding broadband. I don't want the perception to be that I'm trying to pour cold water on broadband. That's not it. It's there. This is a bigger picture issue. And if we're going to create revenues or generate revenues, we have to look at everything holistically, not just by compartmentalized or by department. So, Ken?
And I agree with you. It's important to see the big picture. And I'm probably going to irritate some people in saying this, but the big picture is that millions of dollars have flowed into Jefferson County that was intended to provide relief to low-income people to get them through this crisis. And I personally am not comfortable with the fact that too little of that money has taken the form of direct subsidy. And what we're talking about in comparison is really millions of dollars compared to a very small amount that we get from our taxing authority that relatively speaking would have very minor, almost negligible impact in terms of putting food on the table or paying the electric bill or paying rent for people. So I've made this kind of comment before in a public meeting with the ICG, and I'm repeating myself. And again, I think I'm taking a position which isn't terribly popular, but I would have much preferred that money going into direct subsidies that really would have assisted people who were most in need.
I would agree with that, Ken. I think there has been some disparity in the way that the relief money is being parsed out. Anyone else? All right, so we will move on to anything else from staff on the budget.
We're good.
And I don't believe we have any of the public on. So with that, we will move on to 6.4 recruitment strategies. Kevin, is that you?
This one's going to be both myself and Melanie. And I will start out with a small discussion on we in Jefferson County have a really hard time recruiting people. It's not just the PUD, it's not the county, it's every business in Jefferson County. And we, as a PUD, trying to hire skilled people, have really ran into a roadblock. So as staff, we've been discussing, ways to make our ads stand out when we're trying to recruit people, to make people, when they call Melanie to say, do I want to go there? How can we put a package together to entice people? We brought Joel into the conversation, Don into the conversation on just ideas on how you recruit people where the cost of living is what it is here. And so what we would like to do today is talk about several options. And then per Joel's counsel, then we have to change our policy manual before, we move this forward. There's steps that have to be taken. So I'm going to throw out a couple ideas that we've had as staff, and a lot of them revolve around housing. We've had people that have tried to come in and rent a space for their trailer, and it's too expensive to even rent trailer space, or they're not available. So one of the ideas we threw around is, well, maybe we could work with the port and get a couple trailer spaces that they own, and we would just guarantee the rent. Our people could use them when they come in, and those things the port is very willing to work with us on. We could get a couple spaces from them, and that would be one avenue to get some people here. We've talked about, maybe we need to buy a rental house. There are things that we have had people turn us down because when they interview, they can't even find a rental house to come here for 6-9 months to find something else. So this program would be designed in such a way that we could bring outside people here into Jefferson County. We don't want this program, though. It's not just for like a lineman. When we go to try to find a sewer person if we do the Port Hadlock sewer, we're going to have a very difficult time bringing in a sewer person. We need a network engineer for the broadband stuff. There are just so many key people that we need to entice to come into our community. So that's what we're looking at. It's not for any one group. It would be company-wide. It would be things like, traditionally, we don't give anyone any vacation up front until they've actually worked here for a while. Well, for certain people, that does make a difference. Maybe we can give them some vacation up front. So I'm going to let Melanie talk for a little bit, and then we'll move it over to the board and let you guys give us some direction, and we'll go from there. Melanie?
Yes, thanks, Kevin. So you touched on a lot of the points that we talked about. So I'll just add on. One thing we've explored looking at is a signing bonus as well. And that goes along the lines of just enticing the offer of, we can offer a week of vacation up front, and we also have a signing bonus. Some other things we talked about too is really promoting our work from home policy, working remotely and having a flexible work schedule, depending on the position, provided that the tasks could be done from home. So as you know, we have that policy in place, but really we would use it as a recruiting tool and to promote that as an incentive. Like Kevin said, we would look at purchasing a new house, and we could have our candidates rent that out on the short term while they're looking for either a rental or a home to buy. And then, that would help with their transition on board. So those are the couple strategies that we have discussed. So questions and discussion for the board?
Yeah, it sounds like some interesting ideas. The one that comes to mind for me is our live-in policy. If people can find housing, in nearby areas outside of our service area, I think we should be looking at that on the table as well. I realize we have contractual agreements, for key personnel and for emergency situations that people need to live in the service area. But I think that's one we have to revisit again. I just don't think it's in our best interest to tie our hands geographically, especially now that we can work remotely, like, Melanie just said. That's another one I would like to see back on the table again. Jeff?
I think that looking at providing some housing or having some backup housing for folks is really wise. And I think it's one of those things that some jurisdictions have had to deal with, that have real housing crises in their communities. And we have one, both in terms of shortage and availability. So I'm glad staff is willing to look at that. I think we probably need it. It is tempting to kind of think of relaxing the standards of where people are supposed to live. I think it helps keep people committed to the community, having them live here. And I guess that's where I'm thinking that, and we should help them. We should, if feasible, see if we can get a place or two that we can have available to rent until they can find their own place, while we as a PUD are hopefully helping the other government entities address the housing issue, because it's a huge problem.
Ken?
Yeah, so I'm aware that there are very, very few places to rent. And for that matter, affordable places to purchase are also extremely scarce in the county. So I think our approach needs to be one that gets the maximum benefit for the amount of dollars that we're willing to spend. And if that meant additional trailer spaces for individuals who can do that while they're looking for a piece of land that they can put their own trailer on, I would certainly support that. I would support our leasing a trailer or modular housing for people. But really, I'm looking at what's the way that we can stretch our dollars the farthest and help the largest number of people. So I'm very reluctant to relax the policy on people living in our community. But I certainly, I'm reluctant to do that. I'm not as opposed as I used to be, for what that's worth.
Well, I will throw one more point out and then I'll let Scott go here is, my wife has worked for 37 years for a company in downtown Seattle. In the last 18 months, she's worked remotely. She is as big a part of this community as anyone. And so I would argue that it's kind of a straw man argument that just where someone happens to be working necessarily means that they won't be committed to that community because they aren't physically there. Because my wife also is committed to Seattle. She gives charities, they're there in the Seattle area too. So I think it's a little bit of a straw man argument to say that you're not committed to the community, especially in this age where we're going to be telecommuting. So Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to bring up a little example of the housing issue. We have Titan electrical contractor on site, and their foreman came to me about a month or two ago and asked, hey, is there any trailer parks around this area? I said, yes, of course. And so I came home that night and got this young man a list of trailer courts, about 12 or 13 of them, locally around the area. And he started calling them, called every one of them. He ended up out in Joyce, is the closest he could find, and he's commuting from Joyce to our site every day. Now he's on some waiting lists, so hopefully he gets bumped up and things happen for him there. But as of now, that's where he's coming from.
Thanks, Scott. So I think we're kind of at a point where it'd be nice to see some dollar amounts attached to some of the things that are being proposed. And we realize we don't want it in stone, but some idea of what these proposals with the port and, you know, other entities maybe in the county. And Kevin, any thoughts?
You know, this is really a first blush. This is to get some direction from the commissioners and kind of to let you know, it's really not just the PUD. It's every business in Jefferson County. So it's time again to become part of a solution for our future employees. We have to do it, or we're not going to get the employees we need.
So I am wondering if we can talk to some of the trailer parks and explore the option of a long-term lease on a space or spaces. And I might also mention, close to where I live on Marrowstone Island, someone bought a piece of property, lowland, waterfront, and I'm sure the PUD is aware of it because they put in electrical hookups for half a dozen trailers. And that might be before those sites are all occupied. That might be something that we can explore. So if that seems to be a good way of reserving space for the employees that we need to add to our workforce, I would certainly endorse looking into that.
Yeah, everything's going to be at a premium. And time to maybe start seeing some costs applied to, like I say, all the different options. Anybody else? Any questions, comments on recruitment strategies? If not, we will move on.
Dan?
To, go ahead.
One quick thing, and this is a Joel requirement. We need to change our employee handbook to accommodate what options we have available to the PUD. So at a future meeting or meetings, we will bring back some costs, some tentative dates. I don't know if we will have anything in the next meeting, but at a future meeting, we will bring back a revision to the employee handbook and add a small section on what we can offer at the PUD for recruitment. So that's how this process will work. Primarily be Melanie bringing back a new small section for the employee handbook. And that's kind of the next steps and the dollars involved, you know, that kind of thing. So that's kind of how we see it moving forward.
All right, thanks, Kevin. One last call. Any further questions? All right, we will move on to new business. 7.1, long-term disability coverage for employees in laborers union.
Yes, so I am going to take the lead on this one. Just a little bit of a background. During our negotiations with Laborers 252, we agreed to add the employees that are represented by laborers. We decided to add a long-term disability plan to the contract. So prior to this most recent contract, laborers did not have a long-term disability plan. They had short-term disability, but what this would do is this would allow employees that are on short-term disability, if they are out for 180 days, they would be eligible to apply for long-term disability through standard insurance, which is administered by PERMs. And that's what our IBEW folks and our non-represented folks are on. So it would just be a matter of adding about a third of our workforce onto that long-term disability plan. So we are looking for direction on this tonight, I believe. So I can answer any questions that you might have.
So the fiscal impact again of this?
Yes, the fiscal impact was, I believe, about $450 per month. On top of what we pay for the other 2/3 of the workforce.
And I will point out, this is something that should have all along been in the laborer's contract. It was a real oversight not to be in the contract.
Well, I think this is something we should move forward on. At $424 per month, that's about $5,100 a year. So I have absolutely no problem with their going forward with this.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and I just reiterated the fiscal impact of the audio. That was the only reason I asked the question. I know it was in the packet.
Yes, and thank you, Ken, for clarifying the exact amount on that.
So we
do
should have
we
a motion. Yeah, we should have a motion for this.
So I move that the board approve the long-term disability benefit for our employees who are covered by the laborers agreement.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion on this item? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Unanimous. Motion passes.
Thank you.
All right, so we will move on to 7.2, the long-term care policy.
Okay, so long-term care policy. This, just starting out, this is a new legislation, so I'll just give you a high-level overview. In 2019, Washington State passed legislation to create a public long-term care program. The public program offers a lifetime benefit of $36,000 to be used in Washington State for a range of services that includes memory care, in-home personal care, and nursing facility care. So what that means for us is effective January 1st of 2022, this program will be funded through a payroll tax of 58 cents on every $100 of wages earned. That includes base pay, bonus, and stock. Well, for us, we don't have stock options. That's just taken right from the legislation. So with this, an important detail to note is that if an employee pays into this program through this payroll tax and they do not live in Washington State at the time that they need to use this benefit, they are not able to use it because you do have to reside in Washington State to use the benefit. Another important part of this program is that employees have to contribute to the program for at least 10 years without a break of 5 years or more. Or they have to work 3 of the last 6 years and at least 500 hours per year during those last 3 years in order to access the long-term care benefits. And for that reason, there might be some individuals that may want to purchase a voluntary plan. The legislation has offered, it's a one-time opt-out window where if an employee has insurance, long-term care insurance prior to November 1st of 2021, they can opt out of this state program, provided that they do have a plan that has a benefit of $36,000 or more. So a couple weeks ago, PERMS decided, or Pacific Underwriters decided to offer a voluntary group plan that if we were to pursue this, our PUD employees would be eligible to purchase. So it's a life insurance plan and has a long-term care rider added to it. So, ultimately it is a life insurance benefit, but if an employee was unable to perform 2 of the 6 daily living activities that are outlined in the benefit plan, they can use a long-term care rider for up to 4% of that life benefit. So another important part of this is we're sort of moving at the speed of light with this program in order for employees to get on a voluntary plan before November 1st. The plan would need to start on October 1st, and PERMS would like to do open enrollment on August 30th through September 15th. And if we did move forward with getting a voluntary plan, PERMS does have a third party that is administering it. They would help with doing webinars and education to our employees. They would set up a hotline as well as an email where employees could ask questions about this plan and talk to someone so they have an informed decision whether they want to be on the state's plan or if they would like to purchase a voluntary plan. So it's a very quick turnaround time, and time is of the essence if we do want to pursue this route. So we are looking for some direction from the commissioners tonight. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions and open it up for discussion.
So Melanie, just to be clear, this will be subtracted from the employee's payroll, correct? This is not a PUD subsidy. This is strictly paid by the employees.
That is correct. So employees are fully responsible for the premiums, and it would not be through a payroll deduction because there's so many different PUDs on different payroll systems that are under PERMS that employees would have to pay directly to the insurance provider.
So I guess, and I have one follow-up. So since this is a state mandated program and policy, if an employee were to opt out, but yet not take on a private plan, so to try and get between the lines here, what would that employee, would that be, how would we deal with that as an employer? Would we have to put some sort of a hold against them to get that money? How would the state view that?
So as far as I know, my understanding is that in order to opt out, an employee has to have insurance in place, and they have to submit documentation to the employer as well as to the state. So we would, in order for us not to take that payroll deduction from their paycheck, we would have to verify that they do indeed have an insurance plan.
And all of our employees have been notified and are aware of this program, the situation, everything.
They are, so we wanted to get direction first on if we were able to offer a voluntary plan. I have not put out a PUD wide email, but assuming, whichever direction we go tonight, I am going to get communication out to them as soon as possible.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ken.
I've tried to understand the nature of the plan offered by Chubb, which would be the actual administrator working with PERMS. And even though I have a little bit of experience working in the insurance industry, a lot of the language is at the very least confusing to me. And my takeaway is that the alternative to opt out of the state program, which would cost employees, if somebody with overtime is earning $100,000 a year, then they're paying $580 to the state for the state coverage. But I have no idea what it would cost an employee to pay for life insurance and then qualify for the long-term care rider. So whether the cost of the rider is in some way proportionate to the size of the life insurance benefit, I don't know, or what the rider itself would cost an employee. And I think that's information that we need to have in order to present this as an option to our employees. And you don't want people signing up and using the one-time window to opt out of the state benefit without knowing really fully what they're getting into. And in looking over the information provided, I personally, I don't find it transparent. I find it opaque.
And I was hoping that we're going to get a recommendation out of you, Ken, because this is your bailiwick. So that was, again, as clear as mud to me too. So having said that, I think the more options we give our employees, the better, especially since they're going to be paying for it anyways. It sounds like, if I understood what Melanie had to say. So I am not opposed to getting some more information before we move forward, unless staff needs an actual decision tonight. And again, I would defer to give the employees as many options as we can. That's kind of where my default position is.
I'll jump in. We are hoping to get some information, direction tonight. We do think that this is a very individual decision, and based on how it's been presented through the association and the phone numbers, and how our employees can be given all that information individually, I do think we need to at least give them the option. And it's hard because everyone's in a different spot in their life. You know, if you're close to retirement, the state plan doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe this one does, but at least with this plan, there are people we can contact, give our personal history, and then they will help guide you on the benefits of the plan. So hopefully they will make it clearer than mud.
Yes, and I do have, from Chubb's proposal, I have the monthly premiums that I could screen share if you wanted to see that information at this point. Okay, perfect. So let me pull that up.
And the other thing to remember here is that the state's plan is just really crappy, and it puts everybody in a bad spot because they have to decide, you know, about this, which I'm sure in the end, you know, probably benefits the state, but it just, everybody's got to decide, and it's all at their own cost.
And one point that I don't think I mentioned before is this opt-out period. It is a one-time opt-out. So if an employee opts out now, they can't go back and enroll in the state's insurance, and vice versa. Once you're enrolled in the state, you can't go back and do a voluntary plan. And Kevin, I liked what you mentioned about it's a very individual decision. And I appreciate the fact that PERMs would have advisors ready, because then they could help employees make that comparison with the premiums and the benefit amount to make sure they're enrolling in the plan that's right for them.
If I can ask at this point, Melanie, do you have information about the size of the available benefit for long-term care? We know what the state is offering, and I agree that's not going to go very far. But under the private plan, what is the annual benefit if somebody needs long-term care? And I say that as an individual who's probably closer to that than anybody else on the call.
Yeah, that is a great question. So PERMS is recommending that an employee starts at a $75,000 death benefit. And they can use, I believe it's 4% of that. Is it per month? I am still learning this plan as well. So my apologies on this. But the overall benefit for life insurance would start at 75,000. And that is to make sure that it aligns with the state's plan to make sure that it's comparable or above. Because they do have, there's some language in this plan that says it has to, your voluntary plan has to offer, I think it's $100 a day in coverage. And so when PERMS calculated this out, it ended up being 75,000 would be about that amount.
Well, that's the insurance side. That's the universal life side. What is the long-term care side of the benefit?
Okay, I see your question now. So where did that go?
After hearing legal counsel's evaluation of this, I don't know why this was never challenged somewhere.
Yeah, and there is, so when PERMS went over this proposal, they did go over that rider. And to me, what I remember was it was up to 4% of the death benefit at a maximum of, I believe it was 4,000 a month, but I don't want to misquote it. So I might have to get back to you with accurate information, because I absolutely want to make sure it's accurate information that I'm giving you.
Well, I think it's still somewhat of a moot point because the clock is ticking down to the November deadline, and there's really only two options: either opt out and get your own policy or sign up to this one. Again, my default point is I think we should offer as much as we can and weigh options to our employees at the time, and it's really going to be their decision to make at the end of the day anyways.
Well, I understand the urgency of our making a decision. And I would support approval of this benefit, but with the provision that we provide our employees with clarity, once we have clarity as to what the benefit actually provides, and what's the life insurance side and what's the long-term care side of the benefit, so that employees have an apples to apples comparison.
So I guess the question is to staff, is that something you think you can generate in the near term before our next meeting, or is that just stretch this out too far? The employees are going to have to do somewhat of their own looking into this, I think anyways, Commissioner. I think no matter what we tell them, they should really still verify it themselves. We're not insurance agents. I don't know how much confidence we can give them that what we're telling them is going to be helpful.
And I'm not suggesting that we act as insurance counselors, but provide some sort of, well, I think we're in a position to obtain from either PERMS or from Chubb more detailed information that human resources can provide employees so that they can make a somewhat informed decision, and at least use that as a basis, and then contact someone either affiliated with PERMS or with the direct insurance provider because this is very much individualized, and it's not lost on me what our counselor has said about the really meager benefit offered by the state, which is better than nothing, but it's pretty close to nothing when it comes to paying for long-term care.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ken. This is a first touch. This is under new business. Again, the urgency is with staff. So I think we can just kind of leave it with staff to follow through with what you're asking for there. And it's kind of in their court that they can get this back to us before the next meeting. That'd be a second touch. So.
And with that, I'll ask firms if we are, if we would still be eligible to participate, because their open enrollment will be August 30th through September 15th. So we might miss the cutoff for that, but I will still work to get more information.
Is there, because this is an employee paid benefit, is there any way the commissioners would feel comfortable? We will bring information back to the commissioners, but let perms visit with individual employees to make sure it's good for them. For that to happen, though, I do need a motion for the commissioners to tentatively approve the program.
Jeff?
Yeah, I was going to make that motion because I think what Ken's asking for, the staff would be provided with. And if we don't act on this, they're not even going to get that option. So let's see, get on the right item here. So I was going to make the motion that the board approve the Life Plus long-term care rider plan as something that will be offered on a voluntary basis to our employees.
And I'll second that motion.
Been moved and seconded. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, you have some directions, staff. Go ahead, Ken.
Final comment on this. I'm curious as to why we're put in a situation where we have to make such a quick decision here. Certainly, certainly PERMS was aware that this was coming down the road. And I'm just curious as to why we weren't given, Joel, you have the answer to that question?
Yeah, because no one was. And I just went through the same exact drill with another client, and there weren't insurance products available. My other client, went in a slightly different direction, but it wasn't appreciably better than what Melanie and Kevin has found. So the law just, the legislature put everybody in a really bad spot here. And because there was mandatory opt-out, it just accelerated all of this. So that's it. Maybe Melanie, maybe some other stuff, but that's been my experience with this. And thus I've had about a month or so to develop an opinion about the program that the state put together. So.
Yeah, that is what I have found as well, Joel. And I know that there was, I think it was a couple months ago, there was legislation that shortened the opt-out window. So before there was a longer period to opt out, and they decided to cut that off on November 1st. So that was shortened. And then there weren't many insurance products. At first, PERMS did not offer this, but I believe so many PUDs reached out that they decided to offer this. And they were moving at the speed of light to try to get us a voluntary option. So it was definitely a very quick turnaround. And I think it was just a couple weeks ago, they decided to move forward and offer the PUDs a plan. So that's a little bit more background on it.
Okay, thank you, staff, counselor. Any other questions? We are 2 hours and 17 minutes in. Do we want to take a 5-minute recess? I see at least 2 thumbs up. So it is, we'll call it 7:18. We are going to take a 5-minute recess. We will be back at 7:23. Will, you want to shut us down for 5 minutes? Stan Tupper, president of the board. At 7:23, we're going to reconvene our regular meeting of the Jefferson PD. Commissioner introductions again to confirm we still have a quorum.
Kenneth Collins, Commissioner, District 2.
Jeff Randall, Commissioner, District 1.
Thank you, gentlemen. So we will move on to item 7.3, the Hadlock Sewer Memorandum of Understanding with Jefferson County.
So I will take it away and Kevin can jump in. So I am Samantha Harper. Staff would like to request the Board of Commission to authorize the general manager to sign the memorandum of understanding, which will be called the MOU for the Port Hadlock Sewer Project. So just a little background: on June 22nd, 2021, county staff presented to the Board of Commissioners the background and status of the Port Hadlock Sewer Project. And during that presentation, the county asked the PUD commissioners if the PUD would be interested in providing operation and maintenance services for the Port Hadlock Sewer. With interest from the PUD, a draft MOU was created and is being presented to the commissioners tonight. The MOU is based on an interlocal agreement dated April 4th, 2016 between the county and the PUD. The inside of the packets, the interlocal agreement is attached as attachment B, just for reference. So a brief outline of what is included in the memorandum of understanding is a brief history and status of the Port Hadlock Sewer Project, funding history and current status of funding, a timeline for completion of the phase 1 area, the need for operation and maintenance of the sewer system once complete, and the tools the PUD has to provide the O&M services, the rules of engagement for investigating and providing a mutual aid agreement for how the O&M services will be provided, and then how the PUD will continue to be part of the design phase of the Port Hadlock Sewer. The next steps are working with county staff to investigate and start outlining the operation and maintenance services, including but not limited to how we're going to bill customers, scope of services, and payment options. There will be, and some of the financial impacts prior to taking over the operation and maintenance of the Port Hadlock Sewer is there is staff time and outside money from staff time in assisting the county with design investigations. One of the items that we did recently, we did potholing of our water main along Nessett's Corner, State Route 116, to find the exact elevation and location of where our water main is and how that would affect the pressurized sewer line. And then also just a staff time for scoping the operations and maintenance services and reviewing engineered plans. So with that, staff is recommending that the Board of Commissioners authorize the general manager to sign the memorandum of understanding for the Port Hadlock Sewer. And I just wanted to open it up for questions.
So Samantha's Commissioner Tupper, maybe we'll kind of start in reverse order and with Exhibit B, the existing interlocal. I was curious, was there any talk amongst staff about revisiting any of the items within the interlocal? Because when you read through it, you know, like records, they were only required to hold the records for 5 years, and we're past that date now because this was in April that this expired on that particular point. But it also, you know, this document or this interlocal, you know, it has an indefinite duration unless someone terminated it. Well, it's obviously hadn't been terminated. So there's a couple things that are in contradictory here about maintaining records, and, you know, obviously the length of this we'd need to redo, in my opinion, you know, redo the interlocal in a few aspects. And one of the major ones I was looking at within it had to do with Section 3, which is a county request for services. It has a $50,000 benchmark in there that the manager could do up to that point. I think that's too high of a threshold for this particular project under, or, certain circumstances I could see maybe that, but for this is kind of a standalone type of a project. I don't know that this interlocal meshes with, what we should be looking at as an MOU. That's a lot to unpack there, but I guess the question was, did staff kind of look at the old interlocal and see if there was some stuff need to be done there?
Maybe I can jump in on that because
Go ahead, Joel.
provided some of the initial advice on going forward on the MOU. I mean, the interlocal actually look at just giving the authority of the entities to do a joint project in some way, shape, or form. That gives the PUD the authority to work with the county on something. The operative agreement here would be the MOU. And so that's how I view it. And the record keeping is just, I think that's more, kind of a standard way you would keep records, but wouldn't necessarily need to be revisited. So really the limitation on what the PUD is going to be doing or not doing is within the MOU.
Okay. Go ahead, Sam.
And I want to answer your question regarding the cap amount for money spent. Within the Exhibit A of the MOU in point number 5, and the county and I have talked about this too as well. There is a clause in here that says that, the county will and the PUD will pay for investigative services. But if there comes a point when there's expenses that are outside resources that we need as the PUD, that we can talk and have these conversations with the county for the county to either hire that expert that the PUD doesn't have or reimburse the PUD for services. So we have started those dialogues with the county, and that's kind of reflected. I know it's very squishy and it doesn't have a maximum amount, but we have started those conversations with the county about how to fund this initial phase.
Well, you've already mentioned the potholing. I kind of look at this in phases. You have the engineering, and then you have some of these other exploratory things that have to happen in this process. To me, the county has millions and millions of dollars for this project, and I'm a little concerned that we're going to be kind of footing the bill for things that really should fall under whoever's building it, under their responsibilities and not the PUDs. Potholing, for instance, I'll just say is, it's been my experience in construction that those are costs that are not necessarily borne by a utility. You come out, you put marks on the ground and you have as-built, but when it really comes to finding and locating, that's the project. Whoever's in charge of the project, that's a cost that they have to, associate to their line of business. And it looks to me like we might be setting ourselves up to pay for some things that really should be part of the project cost and not part of a utility responsibility. So again, a lot to unpack there. Anyone that wants to jump on that one can go for it.
I'll jump in, at least on the potholing in a very preliminary project like this, where we're not, our potholing, it's our pipe, it's our, I think the potholing is something we should do. It does help the county determine, elevation of where they want to put their pressurized line, but it's very similar, it is a work in progress. It's our pipe. We should pothole it. We need the information for our drawings. It's more than just for this pressurized line. So the potholing, I think we should do. Other things I'm not sure about, but potholing and certain design criteria that should be part of the PUD's responsibility, I think.
And just to tag on what Kevin said, we are keeping a separate work order just to track the cost. So we're not looking in multiple places of, do you remember last month when we did this? So we are tracking cost in a work order as well, just to keep that number 5 in this MOU open for discussion with the county.
Again, my point is kind of, whoever takes this over, whether it's us or not, we should have a certain amount of buy-in to this in this extent that we may not be the ones that are taking it over, and how do we recover those costs as part of this? Again, that's why I think it's incumbent that it fall more on the project directors than it does on, us at this point in time. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing Sam saying is that we are tracking the PUD's expenses that are associated with this project at this point. And it sounds like it's an open question how much of that we would then go back to the county for reimbursement. But Kevin, is this project well enough defined that you have a sense for what costs we might be seeing that are not going, how much your threshold is for how much we're not going to get reimbursed by the county on this, or is it too evolving at this point to know what those costs to the PUD might be that you might not seek reimbursement for?
It'll be minimal, but I don't know if we know or even the county knows to date what they actually will be. Sam may have a better idea, but we're not talking a large amount of dollars here.
So what's your threshold for minimal? Things that an amount that doesn't raise it to your level of, what's minimal to you?
And I'm saying this in our world, $50,000 is a minimal expense. I hate to, it sounds like a lot, but our business is huge. We spend monies a lot. So 50,000 is a small amount for this project, I believe.
Okay, thank you.
I'll get you in a second here, Ken, but let's keep in mind that 50,000 per different phase, that engineering could be 50,000, potholing could be 50,000, doing, water surveys could be 50. Pretty soon it's $250,000. So that's my concern, is how we're going to track this, how the board's going to be kept up with this. It's one thing to say the manager can do everything under that amount, but pretty soon in the aggregate, it could become a very large bill in a very big hurry. And we need to keep the other perspective on this. And correct me if I'm wrong, this is going to fall on the water department, not the electric department. And we already know we're giving $800,000 in subsidies over the next 5 years to sewer customers out of water. How's the water department budget going to handle this if it gets to be a $250,000 or a $500,000 bill?
Yeah, my threshold is a little bit lower than Kevin's by a couple $10,000 there. But if we're getting into the $250,000 range for this project as the O&M provider, we're not doing our part with communicating with the county, and they're not doing their part by paying for their project. So I hope that it's never going to get there. I was more in the couple $1,000 range, and then I'm going to be knocking on Bob's door and asking him for money. So, but for me, the point was more that the county is receptive, and they should be, to making sure that we move the operation and maintenance and how we get to the services along, and being mindful that it is their project and it's not the PUD's to pay for everything. And that was kind of the genesis of the clause. And for, Kevin and I to work that out with Monty and Bob Wheeler. So I would hope that we're not even going to get into, keep doing these $50,000 as the phases move on in the next 4 years. So.
Go ahead, Ken.
So I move that the board approve the resolution authorizing the general manager to sign the memorandum of understanding for the Port Hadlock sewer.
And I will second that motion.
So it's been moved and seconded. Are there any other questions about the any other questions about this memorandum before we move on to the vote? I guess one last question I have is, in a way, we're kind of committing that we're going to be taking over this when I read this MOU. Did anybody else, other commissioners or legal or the manager, read it in that way? That this is kind of a commitment that we would ultimately be taking over the system. Did anybody else interpret it that way?
I interpreted it that way, and if the PUD with its expertise were not involved in taking it over, I don't know who in hell would.
Okay, any other final questions or discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, so the memorandum has passed. Anything else before we move on? All right, item 7.4, EDC discussion. Kevin, do you want to tell us anything that you've learned in the last couple weeks or days, or before we start the discussion?
We, the administrators met today. It was the port and the county and myself, and we talked about some of the issues and discussions going on, not only at the port, at the PUD and other agencies. When, little background, approximately a month ago, the EDC came to the administrators and had a process to hire the new director and to do some work that needs to be done. The administrators went back and said, no, we're not comfortable with this. Bring us a new agreement. The new agreement was reviewed today by the administrators. It was emailed to us all, but we weren't, there was no real discussion on it. Of the three administrators that were there, part of our discussion was when it was first read, we felt it was okay, or two of them felt it was okay. I had some questions with it. In our discussions today, the bulk of where we see a small issue is when it talks about the hiring committee and that they're having a hard time finding people in districts 2 and 3. We probably should have stated something different there, putting in something like, as we get people from districts 2 and 3, this process will move forward at that time. That wasn't there. That was an oversight by myself and the other two administrators. Other than that, moving this forward, I still believe a well-run EDC is a benefit to our community and to the PUD specifically. So I do know there are some concerns on selecting some people from 2 and 3 districts, but I also believe we can keep pushing them and we can get some people there. And we do have a say on how all this is going to move forward. They do need to hire their director. That is a need that they have, because without a director, there won't be any change. So that was the primary discussion at today's administrator meeting. Dan, do you want to bring up some of your concerns?
Well, I wanted to kind of separate there a little bit. You've got two issues here. One is the hiring of the director, and that's done by a composition of 5 different groups. And I think what you were talking about there relates to that a little bit. And one of the groups is going to be how is it, the public community representatives, I haven't heard exactly or seen how those particular people in that group are going to be determined, vetted, or chosen as far as the hiring of the new director goes. That's where those groups come into play. You're in the public sector group that you're in, Kevin's one. The group that Jeff is in as the electeds is another. Then there's the EDC team, where Brian Koo is part of that to pick the director. I'm not quite sure having him pick his own boss is necessarily a good idea. And then who was the other? There was a community select group of members too. And it's somewhat centric to District 1, which was kind of the hit as I tried to find people to the second part of this, which is to be on the actual board of directors, that not much had changed in the way the EDC was going about forming and moving forward at doing things. It was the same old, that why should I bother that being participants who maybe want to run for the board when it's all going to be geared around District 1. So this thing about District 2 and District 3 representation is a big item towards picking the new director and for determining what the board composition is going to be for the board of directors. So again, a little bit to unpack there. That was one of the things, and I've sent some emails to Brian and Ben, and I know Commissioner from the port has kind of been questioning some of these same things. So maybe we'll throw it over to Jeff as to what he sees happening at the meeting on Thursday.
Yeah, this is Jeff. So we had I had a conversation with Brian Koo yesterday, a short conversation. Then I had a conversation with Heather Dudley Nolette, who's on the board, and also she and one of the other board members are a committee that's recommending processes for getting new board members. So I guess my perspective is a lot of this is in flux, and I think we need to let it develop a little bit more. They're having their next meeting on Thursday, so I think we're going to know a lot more after that meeting. And I think one of the issues with District 2 and 3 representation is for us and others to get the word out about how participating in the EDC will be different in the future than it has in the past. And they can only have board members if people step forward and say they're interested in being board members. And to get people interested in being board members, they need to hear why they should be interested in being board members. And I think the discussions that we're going to be having at Thursday and at future meetings is how this EDC is going to be different than the past. How having the public agencies represented there is different. How having more money in a new executive director and what the focus could be. So I think it's a little premature to start asking some of these questions. I mean, I think it's good to raise the issues, frankly. We need to have these issues on the board so we address them, but I don't think we should be super concerned at this point that we don't have all the answers because we haven't even sat down to really start talking about it. So I think the issues being raised are good. They are reaching out to get some more District 2 and 3 representatives. I think it should be in all of our interests to spread the word on how this is different and to find community-oriented people who are interested in serving, because I think the EDC is going to be a forum for us and the other government agencies together with the private interests represented there to have discussions over really meaningful, important stuff and looking for resources and answers to help fix problems that we haven't been able to fix for a long time. So I think that's what I know. And what I've been assured is that from Heather is that they're working on a process that applicants for the EDC board will go through in a process and to get appointed, and they will be bringing some recommendations forward to the full board on Thursday, and that anybody who wants to serve, the application period is certainly not closed. It's barely opened. All they have right now is people who've been referred. They haven't even applied because the application process hasn't been created, and that we'll know more about the selection process for the EDC director and how that interview process will work. So I think this is all fantastic, frankly, that there's this much interest in the EDC. It means the EDC is more important than it's been in the past. And I think it's more important, frankly, one of the reasons is because we're going to be there and the other public agencies are going to be there. So I'm comfortable with where it is, but there's a lot happening.
If I can ask Jeff, what's the method of reaching out to districts 2 and 3 for people to serve on the board?
I think it's largely been word of mouth. I don't know if anybody has had information in their newsletters. I know that Arlene Allen, I think, is with the chamber is working with Heather on the process to seek more folks, but we can certainly ask those questions on Thursday. I think the news, it'd be great to have some stories in the newspaper because this is a big deal, what we're talking about. So if it's really been only by word of mouth, then yeah, we need to do a lot more.
So I appreciate what you're saying, Jeff, and letting things play out a little bit. But the problem, I don't, not problems, maybe not the right word. What things are up against is the EDC does have a timeline that it seems to be following, though. And that in particular, I'm referring to
I just had to turn this off.
The executive director search. I mentioned earlier that some of the groups that are supposed to be making those determinations haven't quite been filled out yet, I think, to make sure that there's equal, geographic and sector representation. And I've heard that they had like 22 candidates. And according to the timeline that they're on, the EDC executive team and the public sector cabinet are supposed to be winnowing 20 some candidates down to 5 3 days from now. So I think that's a problem. That's too small of a group in too short of a time period without everybody having the ability to weigh in on who the new director will be, because arguably the new director is going to be the face of the new EDC and will have a lot to do with how it's perceived. And if it's perceived that it was someone that was brought in to just preach to the choir and the same old, there's not going to be the legitimacy that you think or want that there would be. So I think that is a concern that everyone at EDC and all the electeds and everyone else in the 5-party agreement should be thinking about at the moment. I get it. Timelines are timelines, and they're trying to make things harmonize with the ADO agreement for dates. That might have to be revisited by your other subgroup that you belong to that's looking at that and say, these aren't realistic timeframes, the end of September or whatever it may be. We might have to stretch this out another month or two. So, and when you go to your meeting on Thursday or whatever, that's, I think, a point that should be brought up, is these timelines may not be in the best interest of everybody at the end of the day when it comes to selecting and hiring this new executive director.
Yeah, I think the points you're bringing up are fair, and winnowing down to 5 or 7 candidates is great if it's a good process and if the candidates are strong. Because having, a fairly large group, which the board is, looking at 22 candidates, it doesn't make a lot of sense either. So I think it depends on things. And I think keeping these timelines in mind and, realizing we're working within a framework, if the framework doesn't work, then yes, we've got some problems. So I will do my best to take good notes and report back to you gentlemen as to what's going on after this meeting. And I know Pam Petronic with the port had expressed some of those concerns also about the EDC director position and how that winnowing process was. And again, anybody who wants to can participate in the Thursday meeting, listen to the Thursday meeting and get this information. But good points. But I think we need to get into the process and see how it's going. And if we have concerns, I think it's that we should raise them. And because this is going to be a pretty high stakes, it's going to be important, and we do need to have skilled people there so that we don't have the same results we've had in the past. We need to have different results. I agree.
And then the third leg of the stool is the ADO agreement and the marrying of adjusting of their bylaws for those two things to match up. That one there, I think there's still some challenges with that. That'll probably come up at that meeting. I sent an email out today to Brian and Ben and copied a few people on that with some of the suggestions I had about the bylaw changes. So again, the confidentiality was one. I saw the port lawyer's position on this, and he felt that it was going to be hard for their commissioners to get around this confidentiality and proprietary information issue as the EDC board tries to go about its business. So again, the confidentiality in that is going to be an issue, open public meetings, public records, that type of thing. And then again, also the sectors, the way the sectors are it's somewhat narrowing, and I think they need to be a little broader to encompass, because you're trying to say, well, we need this particular person from this area for this one sector. I don't know that is, that's starting to hunt for unicorns, in which case that makes it a lot smaller pool of people that would maybe be eligible or willing to take on the roles. So I think there has to be a little bit of a broadening, coming through from their bylaws as to how, those sectors are going to be determined and broken out or prioritized. And I think your group also, your subgroup that you were with, may be working on that as well. I don't know. So.
Yeah. And I think something to keep in mind, I think it's really challenging to try and do new things, new different things when you're trying to develop an organization. And the PUD knows this from experience. If Kevin thinks back to 2013 and what it was like to be growing the PUD, while suddenly, if the commissioners say, hey, we want you to take on this new thing. Hey, we want you to take on that new thing. And the scope of what the EDC does is much smaller than the PUD. So I'm not trying to draw that comparison, but anytime you're trying to develop an organization, which we are, because we're adding board members and we're hiring a new EDC director, as well as take on a new initiative, that's hard. So I think we need to, while we're going through this stuff, think we need to have patience, but we need to not be missing issues. And it's just a reminder that what we're going to be doing is kind of challenging, and it's something that this county has not succeeded at in the past. So we're trying to have success where we haven't had it in the past. And I think we're set to have some success because I think things really have changed that create an environment for that. But that's just one point I want to make. You're growing an organization while trying to do new things, and that requires a little different approach than just kind of hammering it through, because you're trying to get people in place and get them up to speed while you're trying to learn to work together.
And I think artificial timelines are going to exacerbate problems there. Go ahead, Ken.
And I think we need to move on. Our job is to develop PUD policy much more than it is to develop EDC policy. So we're pushing on to 8 o'clock, and I think we've spent ample time on this.
Well, I appreciate your position, Commissioner, but I disagree. These are points I feel as part of the ADO agreement that we should discuss as a group as Jeff goes forward and Kevin goes forward. So having said that, I think I've hit enough of the topics here for Jeff and Kevin as they go forward here about artificial timelines, and picking this director is maybe considered the most important thing that's going to happen. They need to get it right and not do it because they're in a hurry. So.
Well, and I guess to say, you do the best you can, you pick the best person you can, and sometimes you learn from your failures, which we had at the PUD, and we made a great second choice. So I think you just have to move forward and do the best you can. And Dan, I appreciate you bringing up your interest, and Ken, I appreciate you mentioning the time. I'm actually 2 hours earlier or later than you. I'm in Texas, so I'm really ready to be done with this meeting. And Mike Bailey, I think, has jumped off, so good for him. But Dan, I got your points, and I think we'll have a good meeting Thursday, and I'll do my best to report back in a comprehensive manner.
Thanks, Jeff. So, all right, we will move on unless Kevin has anything he wants to add. We will move on to commissioner reports. Jeff, you want to go ahead and go?
I actually don't have my notebook with me, and I realize I don't have a heck of a lot to report since the last meeting. So I'm going to skip it this time.
All right, Commissioner Collins.
So I want to make one parenthetical comment. At a future meeting, I think our board really needs to consider some time parameters for our board meetings. I think if we had an end time in sight, we might be able to work more efficiently. That being said, I'll be happy to give my report. On August 6th, I attended the JBAT meeting. On the 9th, the PUD budget meeting. On the 10th, again, a special board meeting of the PUD and Public Power Council, as well as participating on a call having to do with a customer's water leak. On the 11th, the NOAANET board meeting. One particular point from that meeting, I had several points listed, but the most important thing that I took away, there was a report that firefighters had attempted to use the Starlink system to communicate with each other. That did not work, and they in fact, as a default, switched to the NOAANET system, which did work effectively for their communication. Also on the 11th, I had a call with our general manager. I participated on the 12th in the strategic planning meeting, on the 13th, the JBAT meeting. On the 16th, another meeting with our general manager. I will not be attending the Brennan broadband meeting as I had originally planned. I will be attending the ICG meeting. Oh, I had that listed on the 19th, and that's wrong. The 20th, I'll attend the JBAT meeting. On the 23rd, there is a special Washington Public Utility District Association meeting having to do with the upcoming conference and what we do about that in view of the Delta variant. I look forward to the CAB meeting, joint CAB and commissioner meeting on the 25th. On the 27th, the JBAT meeting. And on the 1st and 2nd, I hope to attend the Public Power Council meeting. On the 3rd, another JBAT meeting and another discussion with our general manager. And on the 7th, I'll be participating in the WAPUTA budget meeting, and that's my report.
Hey, Ken, what's the date on that Brennan broadband thing again, date and time?
The 18th.
So it's tomorrow?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I won't be able to go to that either.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I appreciate your comments on our meeting links, among other things, Ken. And, you know, part of staff was they wanted to have fewer meetings, which leads to having longer meetings. And there's a lot of things that have been coming up. You know, we have a lot of things on our plate, and a lot of things that are on other people's plates that do affect us. So I do empathize or sympathize, whatever word is proper there, I'm not sure, with your points. But I think if we're going to do our jobs, this is what comes with it, is we got to, you know, we need to vet these things out and have the discussions. So with that, I'll begin my report. I attended the PPC members forum on August 4th that dealt with risk management. I attended the PPC, excuse me, executive committee meeting on the 5th. Highlights of that meeting were on the PPC executive director's trip to Washington, D.C. to meet with White House officials on the future of the Columbia River Treaty. And BPA Administrator John Harrison reported also on potentially giving notifications to the Canadians of BPA's intent to start the process to terminate the Columbia River Treaty. Harrison also spoke of BPA's intent to enter the Western Energy Imbalance Market this coming March, which we heard PPC give us a report on at the meeting we had with them. I also gave a report to Port Ludlow Village Council later that day on a broadband update, the strategic plan update, and the meter replacement RFP. I met with General Manager Street on the 6th of August. I was the attending commissioner for the Citizen Advisory Board meeting on the 9th to discuss the meter replacement RFP. Very, very good meeting. Everyone was inquisitive, interactive, and professional. Actually, in the 6 years since I was on there, that's one of the best CAB meetings I had a party to be at. So again, hats off to the CAB for the way that meeting went. There's way too much for me to report on what they talked about. You're getting some emails through the CAB chair of some of their concerns, and Gordon took in a lot of notes, and I'm sure Gordon at the joint meeting will elaborate on some of the things that were talked at that meeting as well. What else? Later that day, I heard the Moss Adams 10-year budget plan and our staff budget bullet points for 2022. I attended the PPC presentation to our staff and board on the 10th. I participated in Waputa Commissioner Education Steering Committee meeting on the 11th. Upcoming topics for Waputa events will focus on manager recruitment, succession planning, and strategic planning. The strategic planning meeting that we had on the 12th was excellent. Hats off to our staff and consulting groups. A job well done. I know we got a couple more meetings to put the polishing touches on that and give the public a couple more chances to maybe weigh in on strategic planning. I listened in on JBAT on the 13th. I met with Kevin Street on the 16th, and I'll be unavailable from the 18th to the 27th, with the exception of the Zoom. On occasion, I will try to make, there we go, try to make the joint meeting on the 23rd. I meet with Kevin on the 30th, and I have PPC on the 1st and 2nd of September, and that concludes my report. So is there any questions, comments, anything else for the good of the order? It is 8:03. With that, I will put us into adjournment.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.